So I'm doing my best as an English speaker, an outsider, but an anthropologist who did my research with Congolese people. And I've been writing the Western, or shall we say, English-speaking press. And so the first article to come out is from the Christian Science Monitor. Forgive me for this video because I'm new to YouTube. The title of the article is Congo Ceasefire. Displaced residents long for normalcy. Here you can see an internally displaced woman at an internal camp within Congo. Growing up in Oicha, a town in eastern Congo in the 1990s, Noe Kasali's playground was his city's streets. Him and his friends stayed out late nearly every night, playing elaborate games in the roads of their neighborhoods as darkness settled over the city. When they went home, their mothers loaded up their plates with plantains, fried beans, and cassava leaves. Today, when he thinks of what lasting peace would look like in eastern Congo, this is what he imagines. His children playing under a full moon, or himself coming home with arms full of vegetables in a family plot outside of the city. When Mr. Kasali heard news last week of a ceasefire between the Democratic Republic of the Congo, DRC army, and a major rebel group, he, like many Congolese people, did not get his hopes up. Quote, "People are tired of living every day with broken promises," says Mr. Kasali, who now runs a trauma counseling center in the eastern city of Beni. And for him, safety has never been about men in a distant conference room in Angola, shaking hands and promising to put down their guns. It isn't soldiers swarming the streets to keep the peace, or 18-wheelers dragging container loads of rice and cooking oil into displaced persons' camps, like the photo above. This photo. It is about being able to go home. It's about being able to go home, he says. People here might be surviving physically, but psychologically, that's what they're longing for, to be safe at home. According to United Nations figures, 5.8 million people have fled their homes in eastern Congo, forced out by fighting that has stricken the region for over 2 decades. Last Tuesday's ceasefire marked the latest in a series of diplomatic attempts to end the fighting that has been raging for nearly a year in this part of the Congo. But it was broken the same day it went into effect, signaling just how flimsy these efforts have been, particularly for those living in the war's shadow. These are ordinary people. These security interventions don't necessarily make people feel safer, says Margaret Monyani, a senior researcher at the Institute for Security Studies in South Africa. The underlying issues aren't necessarily being dealt with. I would agree. The underlying issues are not yet to be dealt with. And in eastern Congo, those underlying issues are extremely complex, or shall we say complicated. So this is a photo of what appears to be, yes, I can confirm, these seem to be peacekeepers serving with the United Nations. Suffering in silence. Since the late 1990s, the region has been buffeted by fighting between the government and dozens of rebel groups, which have killed and uprooted millions. That violence has been fueled in part by ethnic grievances that straddle the region's borders. And this is because there are people and tribes on both sides of the border of the country that the colonials drew a line and the border, and so it's split people up, it's split families. You have families on one side of the border and families on the other side of the border. To continue, the most recent fighting, for instance, is largely between the Congolese army and a rebel group called Mouvement du 23 Mai. I'm still learning French, so we're gonna say it's the movement of the 23rd of March, or in short, M23, which allegedly receives significant assistance from the government of neighboring Rwanda, according to the UN and other sources, I would say. And in parentheses, Rwanda denies providing the group with any support. Rwanda's involvement in Congo dates back to the mid-1990s. Rwanda invaded the DRC, then called Zaire, to hunt down perpetrators of its genocide, who had taken refuge there. The conflict spiraled, leading to the overthrow of Zaire's longtime dictator Mobutu Sese Seko, and plunging the country's eastern borderlands into violence that continues to this day. Much of the conflict has been both driven and bankrolled by the country's enormous deposits of metals, such as gold, tin, and tungsten. There's also, I want to add, cassiterite and cobalt. They didn't mention that, which fuel batteries and electric cars. To continue, in 2021, the Norwegian Refugee Council, an international humanitarian agency, found that no other displacement crisis in the world received so little media attention. The Congolese, the report argued, suffer in a deafening silence. M23 is one of about 120 rebel groups. I'm not sure where they got that number of the 120 rebel groups, but we're going to say there are a significant number of auxiliary local militias. I'm not sure if the number is 120, but here it is. M23 is about one of, they say, the Christian Science Monitor, 120 rebel groups to emerge from this instability. Yes, several rebel, or shall we say auxiliary local militias protecting their villages, and sometimes things get out of hand, but yeah, anyway, to continue. These groups emerge from this instability, which a UN peacekeeping force in the region, which is MONUSCO, they did not mention that, the longest lasting and most expensive initiative of its kind in the world, has proved unable to tame the conflict. Initially formed in 2012, M23 briefly conquered the city of Goma, the regional hub in that area. It's a large trading city, or it's a medium-sized trading city. In November that year, it was effectively defeated by 2013, but in March last year, the group reformed and began launching new attacks. Since then, about 600,000 people have fled their homes to escape the fighting. Nearly half of them are now living in makeshift settlements, the camps for internally displaced people, on the outskirts of Goma, relying on precarious humanitarian aid for survival as their crops rot unpicked in their fields at home. But even for those who haven't had to flee, the war has seeped into daily life in ways large and small. In the markets of Goma, for instance, staples of Congolese cuisine like beans, palm oil, and cassava are selling for bloated prices because they are in limited supply. Roads in and out of the city are either closed or patrolled by armed rebel groups. Armed rebel groups, meaning people who are invading, making it nearly impossible for these farmers who are still working to get their goods to the market. So you have a blockage between Goma, the city, and the outskirts where the farms are. This is very, very common in Goma. You have this exchange between the farms and the outside of Goma, and then the city and the markets in the city. So now you have these rebel groups from the outside, and they're controlling the roads. So people are kind of stuck in Goma at the moment. Well, I shouldn't say kind of, but people are literally stuck in Goma at the moment. This is a photo of some European diplomats who went there a few days ago. Well, we'll just see how that goes. Another meeting, another peace deal. Since mid-2022, officials from the DRC, Rwanda, and other countries in the region have met several times to discuss ways to end the fighting. But negotiations have repeatedly broken down, in part because most of the negotiations have not included M23 itself. M23 leaders said they found out about a ceasefire negotiated in Angola last November on social media. So we're having a communication breakdown, it appears. Meanwhile, soldiers from a regional East African force deployed to enforce peace, quote unquote, enforce peace, have been met with widespread skepticism. This includes the army, or we should say, troops from Kenya first, Burundi, and now Angola, not part of the East African community. They have been deployed to go to Congo. Quote, at a very basic level, people want normalcy, not people walking around their cities with expensive guns, Ms. Monyani, the researcher, says. Last week, at another meeting in Angola, M23 agreed it would lay down its arms by Tuesday, March 7th. Today is Tuesday, March 14th, 1 week later, at noon. An M23 spokesman, Lawrence Canukia, told Deutsche Welle that the ceasefire would, quote, open the way for direct dialogue with the Kinshasa government. But the Tuesday noon deadline for the ceasefire came and went, and fighting continued. On Saturday, the Angolan government said it would send a military unit to the eastern DRC to try to shore up the ceasefire it had brokered, as I mentioned. But doubts persist about the efficacy of such moves. I haven't seen any evidence to think the parties are coming closer to discussing the problems at the root of the crisis, such as ethnic discrimination against Congolese Tutsis, the group at the core of M23, says Delphine Ntanyoma, a visiting researcher at the Erasmus University in Rotterdam, who studies conflict in Eastern Congo. This person from the outside. Quote, the current M23 is an offspring of other rebel insurgencies that claimed to defend the discriminated ethnic Tutsi, he says. At his counseling center, meanwhile, the therapist in which the story began Mr. Casale says he often hears people speak warily of these international attempts to broker peace. They will tell you the priority of the world is not our lives.